Well, hello there. Welcome back to Warship CS, finally. Obviously, it has been several months since the last time I did a Warships video. So, I figure, it might be a good time for me to revisit the game and to let you guys know what's new. Well, nothing's really new in particular, but what I have and pretty much all I have at this point are replays that are notable, if you will. Of course, at this point I do have essentially a video on the Baron as well as the Gneisenau ready to go, but because they have been on the back burner for so long, I figured it's probably a good idea for me to focus on some of the fresher materials I have.
It's a go.
So here we are. Anyways, so the latest season of ranked gameplay has arrived, or much rather it happened a couple days ago, and I decided to I guess go chase after the rewards, if you will. The flags and a daemon premium's kind of nice to have, given my questionable financial state in the game at this point. So anyways, for this season ranked, you essentially play tier 7 to start. I believe at this point I was a rank 17. Obviously I don't have that many tier 7 ships. What I do have are a Meoko, Nagato, as well as the Gneisenau.
Concentrate fire on the designated target.
It seems that, there's always an abundance of cruisers in ranked gameplay. And of course, the German battleships are actually fairly common. Simply because, it's a new line, and as with the Scharnhorst, people can simply just buy them with cash. So compared to those ships, the Nagato essentially is slower and has bigger guns. About the same armor, more health. So hypothetically, it could be better at brawling, and certainly better at sniping, simply because the alpha and the volume of fire and the penetration it has at long range. But of course, the German battleships all have torpedoes, so maybe brawling with them would not be the best ideas. And by the look of it, in the beginning of the game, I essentially managed to hit some of the easier enemy targets. And by easy, we are essentially talking about the angle at which they presented themselves and the range and their movement. Obviously, when the enemies are flat side on or broadside onto you, they're much bigger targets, and their movements much more predictable, regardless of how fast and slow they're going, and whether they're accelerating or de-accelerating. Ultimately, ships do not turn on a dime either. One good thing about this situation is the fact that my allies are all actively participating in this battle, in a sense that they're all engaging the enemies and maneuvering. So, in a sense, they give the enemies something else to shoot at, aside from me. And one thing to note is the fact that our German battleships, due to their smaller caliber and arguably their worse dispersion and relatively lack of penetration compared to my ship, they essentially chose to get closer. So in a sense, their presence kind of spared me a lot of hits. and without the need of having to angle your armor and having to maneuver to avoid being hit and to avoid taking high damage rolls, I essentially can try to focus on my shooting in relative peace. And ultimately, my principle, my goal is to make every single salvo count. Always go for the vulnerable enemies that's going to be allowing you to have a high roll, to do more damage. And perhaps another thing to note is in battleship gameplay, it's very important for you to think ahead and to process the enemy's intentions and their perceived trajectory down the road, so that you can essentially have your guns well aimed and ready to go the moment you're reloaded. And by not wasting your time with shells in the barrel ready to go but you couldn't fire, you're essentially maximizing your DPM. In the long run, that's really going to add up.
It's a go.
And so essentially, we pummeled the enemy Colorado to death.
I owe you one.
And I think, this speaks strongly about what is wrong with most of the standard battleships, as with, the post-World War I or World War I vintage American battleships. That's how they're capable of doing 21 knot. They just simply do not have the tactical flexibility to play competitive games on warships. They're slow enough that, if they want to seek out engagement that the enemy want to avoid, they can never make it, because it's not up to them. Meanwhile, if they want to avoid being hit or killed, they don't have that choice neither, because virtually everything in game are faster. Meanwhile, as you can see, I'm maneuvering and angling my ship against the enemy Nagato. This way I can effectively dodge the incoming fire. Meanwhile, for any of their hits that actually do get to me, there's less chance to miss Citadel me or Pyro, essentially. On the other hand, the enemies are essentially spamming HE at me because they know I'm angled, and their rather armor-piercing shells will not do that much to me. Because as with high explosive, they will essentially splash and always do some damage as long as they hit. Unless they hit the very heavily armored portion of your ship, of course, which is near the waterline. Meanwhile, in the same situation, armor piercing might as well just overpan or bounce. So I guess the enemies know what they're doing. And of course, the enemy Nagato is essentially doing what many high-tier battleship players tend to do. That is to slow down and speed up randomly, so that you will misjudge their position and their movement. I guess perhaps the only way to tell that maybe they're sitting backward or they're not going anywhere is to observe their smokestack. As the ship sailing backward in game has their smoke blowing towards the front of the ship rather than the back.
It's a go.
At this point, I wanted to engage the enemy from the south because we do have multiple ships that are covering the enemy's northern flank. So in a sense, we can form a pincer. But then I quickly realized by going down this route, nothing good will happen, because there are actually at least 3 enemies on this side. They're spamming HE, which means if they start several fires, it'll be very difficult for me to contain, and I'll be whittled down, for lack of a better word. And of course, as mentioned, the German battleships are torpedoes, so if I get too close, well, within 6 kilometers, as a matter of fact, I'm at a risk of being hit by torpedoes, if you will.
The ship is on fire! Problem solved, sir.
And of course, another thing to note with warships is that you always want to take advantage of various terrain features, islands and mountains, so that, you know, you can choose to not be shot by enemies if you don't want to be. But of course, another thing to take notice is that some islands and hills or mountains are already tall enough to obscure a direct line of sight, but they're not tall enough to obscure the trajectory of your guns, because the enemies are so far away that your shells will actually just arc over. Meanwhile, just as expected, SMG made that turn and avoided multiple enemy torpedoes. So that was a good call. And I'm actually engaging the enemy destroyer, even though I'm shooting armor-piercing shells. Decided to do that anyways because he was all the enemies that's exposed to me. And of course, you know, he was in such a low health that, you know, if he simply took a couple armor-piercing overpans that rose for about 1000 HP each, he would have died anyways. Ironically, I finally loaded my guns with HE, but the enemy destroyer died anyways. So I ended up shooting the enemy battleship with HE to clear my barrels. And he burns from that. So I suppose he wasn't a complete lost cause. Sometimes starting a fire at the right time can open to, should I say, spectacular results. Make the enemy base repair, or burn them down while they couldn't repair. Sometimes that's how you win games. And there he goes. Even though my secondary hit him a couple times, he was ultimately inconsequential. So much for Nagato's, quote, good secondary, if you will. So here we are at our second replay of the day, if you will. It's a tier 8 game. I'm playing my tier 7 Japanese cruiser, Miyoko. As you guys might have realized, you know, I'm not really a big cruiser player. I'm definitely not that much of a destroyer player neither. But I figure, you know, since, you know, the latest ranked season's on, and I'm going to be using more tier 7s to farm off other rewards, I might as well, you know, take my Miyoko out and make sure myself is not too rusty with cruising. So, the Miyoko is a really good ship, and I believe this is actually the very first cruiser gameplay ever shown on my channel. First of all, the Miyoko is really fast. It does 35.1, I believe, knots really easily in a straight line. Armor-wise, it's not bad. I believe the mean waterline belt for the Citadel is actually 5 inches. It does get a questionable reputation for being vulnerable in each Citadel because it does have 5 turrets, as well as 2 sets of torpedo launchers on each side. So in other words, you essentially have a larger than average citadel that, should the enemy projectile with adequate penetration hit, will do spectacular damage, unfortunately. But then, of course, if you're maneuverable and you're fast and you know how to angle yourself and present yourself properly, you can often be spared.
It's a go.
A few other things to notice about the Myoko is the fact that the placement of these 5 turrets is kind of tricky in a sense that the 3rd turret, even though it's located in the front quarter of the ship, essentially have a backfiring arc. Of course, you can kind of shoot towards the front to an extent, but it doesn't really have a unobstructed wheel the A and B turret have. Meanwhile, its armored torpedo launchers unfortunately only shoot broadside on and towards the back, but not towards the front. So you can't really use the torpedoes ideally as an offensive weapon or as a forward-firing ambush weapon. In a sense, they work best as a area denial weapon while you're retreating, or as a last-ditch weapon while you are brawling, if you will. Such as when the battleship gets too close and they're sideway onto you. A couple other things to note about the Myoko, I'm sure many of you guys probably already know at this point, is the fact that it does get the A defensive cooldown. So should you be under air attack, it does have the ability to scatter enemy aircraft. But once again, as with most Japanese ships, the AA scheme on this cruiser is too reliant on 25mm autocannons, which have a questionable DPM and range. So even though you'll be able to scatter enemy air attacks, you usually don't have the DPM to wipe them clean the way American ships could, unfortunately. But as another added bonus, this ship does also come with a catapult fighter. At least in my configuration it does. In a sense, the catapult fighter can also be used to scatter enemy airstrikes. Of course, some other people probably choose to use a spotter, but personally I'm not a big fan of that, simply because it kind of ruins the ergonomics of your shooting and aiming process. In my eyes, it seems to be much harder to lead with the spatter aircraft in the air, essentially. And what I'm doing right now is that even though originally at the beginning of the game, I went towards the western side of the map, because that was the team's original plan. But then at this point I realized we must somehow react to the enemy's push on the eastern side of the map, or the team's going to take heavy casualty, or the situation might become uncontained, if you will. As you can see, I'm essentially 18 spanning the enemy war spot. He's not quite at the extremity of my range, but as you can see with my shot placement, the accuracy for the Myoko's 8-incher guns are actually excellent. And even as the was turning, I was able to land 7 out of 10 shots, which is not bad, to be honest. Unfortunately, at that point, I took a citadel hit from the enemy Pensacola. Even though I was partly angled, unfortunately, that doesn't show the nature of the cruiser armor. Sometimes the angle is still not enough. And finally I'm here, doing what I'm supposed to do. As in,
We've sunk an enemy destroyer.
essentially doing a cruiser's job of countering destroyers. Thankfully, I got lucky because my high explosive spam managed to detonate enemy's magazine, which obviously on a destroyer is quite fragile.
Concentrate fire on the designated target.
I don't think the enemy was flying the anti-detonation flag or perhaps using the magazine protection module / upgrade.
Problem solved, sir.
Meanwhile, I believe the enemy Bismarck has unfortunately ran himself aground and has gotten stuck on the edge of the island. And with the ship being so huge, the stern of the ship sticks out, and I managed to essentially put quite a few shots into it.
Enemy battleship destroyed.
And there he goes. So even though at this point we possess 2 out of the 3 caps on the map, and we do lead the enemies by close to 300 points, I decided to not take any chances at all. And obviously with 2 of the enemy destroyers still alive, they can obviously use their stealth and maneuverability and mobility and to operate out of the side of the map the enemies still possess. They obviously and understandably pose a major threat to the friendly heavy units we have, especially our battleships. And to be honest, what I'm doing right now is semi-risky because this side of the map's waterways are relatively compact. There are many islands behind which the enemy's smaller units can hide from. So I can be easily ambushed by torpedo at this point, but I essentially decided to poke the enemy destroyer with a stick and to confront them. Sometimes when you're aggressive enough, the enemies will miscalculate. And I do believe there is a stealthy enemy unit that's spotting me at this point, because my situational awareness perk ticked off. So at this point I felt that perhaps the enemy spotting me was towards the north. So instead of predictably confronting him, I decided to divert my attention to the cap itself and to draw the enemies in, because obviously at this point they're going to want to make sure that they still own the cap and I did not take it from them. But in this case, just simply because the physical location of the cap, you can essentially force the enemy to engage you in a predictable manner and at a predictable location. It's better this way than to try to out-camo or outspot them on the open ocean, which obviously, against the destroyer, I might as well be out of luck in that regard. And as they say, when there's smoke, there's fire. Well, on warships, it's when there's smoke, there's probably destroyer. Well, in some cases a cruiser, but now cruisers have the berg. So one reason why I decided to slow down was to take enough time to cap out the cap. Another reason why I ended up doing that was to essentially troll and bait any torpedo the enemies might have launched at me, because by slowing down, their lead will be completely off.
Fighter airborne.
And now I'm launching my catapult fighter. It's not a spotter, so it doesn't extend your artillery range, but you might end up spotting the enemies in concealment, behind the obstacle or in smoke, just simply because it's flying over them. Unfortunately, I couldn't really control where the plane goes, but And so right now, I decided to take blind shots towards the origin of enemy's tracer fire in the smoke. Obviously, I don't have a radar or hydro surge consumable, but simply because my guns are accurate enough, and I simply aim towards roughly the spot where the enemy fires came from, and end up hitting the enemy and starting a fire.
Enemy destroyer foundered.
So there he goes. Perhaps this is the reason why many destroyer drivers will not completely be stationary.
Torpedoes to starboard. Hull breach.
Even when they're in smoke.
Problem solved, sir.
And perhaps this time I got lucky by having held my repair consumable on reserve, so that despite the fact that I took 2 torpedo hits, I managed to stop the flooding relatively quickly. And by the look of it, I have to guesstimate and shoot blindly once again. And soon you will see that the enemy destroyers are visibly upset and call me a cheat and hacker and whatnot. But the reality is that at the end of the day, the blind shots works. So I managed to dodge the enemy torpedoes because I kind of expected them after taking the previous hits. Meanwhile, the enemy is close enough and my guns are accurate enough. Shooting the place where the tracers originate is enough to hit the enemy.
We've sunk an enemy destroyer.
And let's just say that, destroyers doesn't like to be hit by 8-inch high explosive shells. They don't last very long, at all. And there he goes, calls me cheater. What an idiot.
Battle ends in 5 minutes.
And I believe the enemy cruiser ended up running away and he survived. But we end up winning by points. So that was that. Pretty mundane game, except for the fact that I got caught for being a cheater, if you will. I sure hope the degree of idiocy on Warships doesn't stoop to tanks level, for the lack of a better word. And so, for the second half of today's video, our focus is actually on some of my gameplay in the American Tier 5 battleship, the Vogue. The Vogue was obviously previously featured on my channel. I do believe some of my subscribers are big fans of watching aircraft carrier gameplay. I guess, you know, they are more like a bunch of RTS guys than shooter guys, if you will.
Autopilot mode enabled.
Group 3, ready. Group 2, ready for takeoff.
So in this game, I'm essentially meshed to a enemy Jueho. So there's only one aircraft carrier on each team. And this is not one of those Tier 5 or Tier 6 games, or a Tier 5 or Tier 4 games, in which, you know, you're gonna get a Lanley or Hosho on one of the teams. So it's really more of a duel than anything.
Group 2, maintaining present course.
At this point, my Vogue is obviously eluded. I have long had the independence researched, but I have never ended up purchasing that ship.
Standing by for instructions.
But I do play the Vogue for fun because it is fun. At this point, my captain does have multiple, should I say, impressive skills,
Destination reached.
and all the upgrades and equipments are in place. The ship's obviously elite. Even though I decided to continue to use the stock loadout, simply because it gives me a chance to have torpedo bombers rather than dive bombers, while preserving some ability at achieving air superiority. Obviously, a lot of veteran CB players will say that the air superiority loadout in the Vogue is kind of strong, or if you're on the receiving end of it, cancerous. But I don't believe that's really a good idea, simply because your ship only have a capacity of 14 fighters when you're using the elite F4F Wildcat
Approaching target.
aircraft.
Group 2, taking fire.
So, you know, even though in that loadout they have a chance to essentially swarm, overwhelm the enemy early on, they also
Group 2, standing by for instructions. Over. Group
might suffer the chance of
target. Group 3, standing by for instructions.
taking too much attrition and end up exposing themselves and end up not having an aircraft left fairly early on in the game. And of course, when you have more than two groups, there's less attention and less micromanagement that you can do, so that less chance to strive, less chance to do a well-placed bombing run. You know how that goes. And I must say, in this game, the enemy aircraft carrier is very well played. Being a Japanese aircraft carrier, he gets smaller squadrons and their planes are generally more fragile, but he does have 4 groups. So one thing he has been doing is splitting up his aircrafts, so that, you know, with my single group of fighters, I'm completely unable to engage multiple groups and sorties and waves and enemy attack aircrafts. They essentially have to take the bait of one enemy groups. Meanwhile, the rest of the enemies will be afraid to do the dirty work, for the lack of a better word. As you can see, my fighters end up chasing after dive bombers on the eastern side of the map, but at the same time, I end up being too far away to do much about their torpedo bombers making an attack run on the west side. Even though looking back, to be honest, wasting time to deal with a Jueho's dive bomber, it's quite basically unnecessary. Simply because the Jueho's dive bombers are a bunch of weak biplanes, so I can only do marginal damage. Meanwhile, I essentially forced my torpedo bomber to a hasty drop onto the cluster of enemy battleships, simply because the enemy fighters show up to intercept them. And had I loitered longer and hesitated longer, the quality of the drop could have been worse, simply because I would not have been able to adjust a better angle and better positioning, if you will. But then, as you can see, that's the power of the F4F Wildcat fighter, the 6-plane squadron. You know, he essentially went straight into the enemy A6M0s, 4 planes, and I ended up shredding the enemy with a loss of only 1 aircraft. At this point, obviously, I do have a lot of spare ammo left in my fighter group, but I decided to send the planes back to my carrier just simply because it's such a strong enemy. I prefer to have a full complement of aircrafts at my disposal in the air. Because, you know, if the fighter group is under strength, the enemy really has a better chance to win a fight if they have shipborne AA help and sometimes even shipborne catapult fighter help. And unfortunately, at this point, my team decided to ignore the entire eastern side of the map. So the enemy essentially pushed through effortlessly. I do believe the first ship they have that made it over was a Kuma, Tier 4 Japanese cruiser, which is very agile, even though fragile. The only ship our team has on that side of the map is actually a Phoenix, Tier 4 American cruiser. But I don't know if the Phoenix was a noob or AFK or a bot. The guy is essentially not shooting effectively at all and has to run himself aground. So I essentially decided to make a many drop attacking run with my torpedo bombers and the Kuma. Normally when you are engaging a light cruiser like that, they're really agile enough to avoid being hit. But then I decided to go for it because the enemy has gotten too close to me, and with the Kuma being able to make over 30 knots and my ship being slower than a tug at 16 knots, if he gets any closer and decides to shoot me, I'm free food. Another thing I noticed was the fact that he was essentially tunnel visioning on our friendly cruiser that was being pummeled to death. So he wasn't really turning. Perhaps he was doing that to get a better aim with his guns, as you know, Japanese guns do not turn very quickly. But in a sense, that made him a better target. And even though he did turn eventually, it was too late. And you know, with the Japanese cruiser having so little armor, 3 torpedoes was enough to take him out. And quite frankly, if he only took 2 and had already expanded his repair consumable, he would have easily flooded to death anyways.
Group 3, maintaining present course.
Meanwhile, because you know my ship is being threatened by the enemy surface units, I haven't had the best of luck to essentially engage the enemy aircraft and provide air cover for my friendlies on the western side of the map, where the enemy torpedo bombers have definitely made a killing, unfortunately. And so first I went into a strafe, but I missed because the enemy's torpedo bombers attacking run ended early. Meanwhile, the enemy's fighters decided to chase my fighters, while my fighters were chasing after these torpedo bombers. I ended up taking a little casualty, but managed to just simply engage in normal dogfight with the help of shipborne AA, courtesy of our friend Kaiser.
Group 3 returning to ship.
Group 2 returning.
At the same time, my torpedo bombers made another minor drop attacking run on enemy battleships that's also pushing through the east side of the map. And essentially he has to be attacked because there's essentially no friendly units left on that side of the map to stop the enemy push, to protect the cap from the enemies, as well as to protect myself.
The enemy team has taken the lead.
And ironically, despite the notoriety of American battleships, at least the mid-tier battleships, being really slow, they have no problem chasing down a bulk at all, because the bulk can only do 60 knots, while they can manage 21.
Group 3 ready.
And unfortunately, despite the damage I've done to the enemy battleships, he's already close enough to shoot me. And this is a very dangerous situation. Although luckily, it does seem to be not completely a desperate situation, because there's a friendly destroyer on that side of the map that, by the look of it, is ready to engage in enemy battleships. Even though I do believe the friendly destroyer is kind of hesitant and trying to use the cover of the island to essentially ambush the enemy with torpedoes. And at the same time, another wave of my torpedo bombers are back in the air and ready to strike at the enemy battleships. It's essentially down to my torpedo bombers as well as the friendly destroyer at this point to stop this push. As you can see, I micro-adjusted my drop multiple times in the last minute to make sure I get the best lead. Unfortunately, the enemy turns and he only took one flooding and 2 torpedo hits. So that's something, even though it might not be enough. And unfortunately, I haven't really had the chance to use my fighters to shut down enemy airstrikes on the western side of the map once again. So, you know, you always have to consider a domino effect. When something happens, then something else will happen, and when something happens, something else just can't happen. And obviously I could have focused on air superiority, but then I probably would have died fairly early to surface attacks on the east side of the map. But ironically, that's happening simply because my team mostly neglected and ignored the eastern side of the map to begin with. It's a bit of a vicious cycle, if you will.
Group 3 ready for takeoff.
Group 2 standing by for instructions. Over.
Group 3 airborne.
My torpedo bomber is almost ready to go once again.
Group 2 awaiting instructions.
And now they're in the air.
Group 2 awaiting instructions.
It's funny, briefly for a second, I was going to go for a attacking round on the western side of the map, but I realized, you know, our surface units are still doing okay. Meanwhile, on the eastern side of the map, things will be completely wide open if our destroyer dies. And to be honest, with 2 enemy battleships pushing against him, the odds are really against him at this point. So he needs my help. And one of the enemy battleships is really low on health, so I told our friendly destroyer to essentially start a couple of fire on him and he'll just burn to death. But the destroyer didn't listen. But understandably, he was probably panicking And obviously at this point I'm making a really tough choice because I can either try to easily take out the low health enemy battleship or to go for the higher health enemy battleship and for our higher alpha strike. Luckily our friendly destroyer ended up killing the low health enemy battleship,
Group 3, awaiting
and the other
instructions.
enemy battleships is essentially forced to turn.
Group 2, standing by for instructions. Group 3, we're under attack. Group 3, standing by for instructions.
Meanwhile, at the same time, the enemy battleship effectively turned himself away from my planes. So that in order for me to line my attack run up, I had to essentially chase down the enemy, well, under the fire of his AA. Ended up losing his ship, 2 planes in the process, if you will.
Group 2, standing by for instructions. Over. Group 3, returning.
But even though my torpedo attack was down to 4 torps, still managed to land 2 hits. Not terrible because now the enemy is short on health, and if he floods, he might have to use repair. If he uses repair, he's vulnerable to fire. Even though I do believe, unfortunately, our destroyer died. And the situation is still quite difficult because one enemy is actually capping our cap, and the enemy also lead our team by 1 ship.
Group 3, ready.
Right now the situation is getting tougher than ever because the enemy aircraft carrier has moved up probably to help them cap. Meanwhile, the other 2 enemies are actually on our cap. And I do believe our surface units are too far from our cap to really engage. An enemy does have some terrain cover, unfortunately. So due to attrition, my torpedo bomber squadron is down to 5 planes. My hangars are running out, but there's no time to waste. I have to go in for another attack run.
Group 3, we're under attack.
Go for a menu drop, because American torpedo bombers spread is actually
Enemy.
narrow and tight enough to make this worthwhile. And I don't really have 2 groups to scissor torp the enemies, unfortunately. Unfortunately, I ended up losing 1 more torpedo bomber, so I'm down to 4 now. But luckily, the enemy ended up taking 2 torps also. So and unfortunately, at the same time, I left my fighters briefly unattended. They ended up coming under the shipboard AA fire from the enemy carrier, and I took some casualty in that regard too.
Awaiting instructions. Group 2, standing by for instructions. Over. Group 3, ready for takeoff.
Luckily, the enemy battleship finally dies as our surface unit moved closer to the cap. So they are down to 1 carrier and 1 fairly fragile cruiser. By the look of it, we probably got this game.
Group 2, taking fire.
And unfortunately, even at this point, I'm still too distracted to shut down the enemy airstrikes, unfortunately. So so it's been a challenging game. It managed to do decent damage against enemy surface units, but that's with the air fight.
Group 3 taking fire.
I wasn't having any luck at all. And now I'm essentially doing a menu drop of torpedoes on the enemy carrier.
Group 3 approaching target.
The Uriko is a very fast moving carrier, just about as fast as most cruisers.
To ship.
So my first estimate of his position ended up being off. And then for a menu drop, my plane had to readjust. Ended up losing 2 aircraft in the process. And all the troops that got out, only one hit, and he flooded. And so in the end, by the look of it, we barely win the game as timers runs out by points. Just barely. And last but not the least, the very last replay for this video is actually going to be another Bulk CV replay once again. I did pretty well in this game, but this game, it's a bit of an antithesis to the previous game in the sense that I didn't do nearly as much against surface units, but it ended up dominating in the air. But then one thing to note is the fact that in this game I'm actually top tier, and the enemy has 2 carriers, including a tier 4 Hosho. And obviously the Hosho's planes are absolutely no match against what the Bulk has.
Autopilot
I believe
mode
the best
enabled.
fighters the Hosho can have are actually A5Ms, which is the predecessor to Zero, and they're relatively small and fragile and slow. Meanwhile, I do believe in the attack air wings on the Hosho actually have multiple biplanes, so they're also very slow and fragile as well.
Group 3 airborne. Group 2 maintaining present course. Group 3 standing by for instructions. Over.
Meanwhile, I noticed the enemy fighters approaching through the western side of the map. I don't quite know whether they're trying to intercept our attacking aircrafts or they're simply scouting for our carriers. But as you can see, they're instantly down by 3 aircrafts and no loss to me at all.
Standing by for instructions.
That's how much stronger the F4F Wildcats are versus the Japanese Tier 4 aircrafts. And ultimately, I think the enemy made a bad move by singling out his relatively weak aircrafts.
Awaiting instructions. Group 3 awaiting instructions.
He would have done much better if he bundled his fighters with their friendly Bogues fighters and simply add to the DPM of the stronger fighters.
Under attack. Approaching target.
At this point, I noticed essentially 2 squadrons of enemy torpedo bombers, the Tier 4s from the Hosho, and they're flying in a fairly close formation, and their movement is also linear, so I decided to go for a strafing run. Ended up taking out 5 out of the 8 enemy aircrafts, while the last 3 kind of fly out of my strafing zone, if you will. Had to chase him down, wipe him out, but he wasn't hard. Meanwhile, my torpedo bombers are kind of loitering for an easy target.
Group 3 returning to ship.
Decided to go for the enemy cruiser. I believe it's either Omaha or Phoenix.
Enemy cruiser destroyed.
Normally, I would say that
Off
a
to a
cruiser
great
that's capable
start.
of doing 35 knots are definitely not an easy target. But I believe the enemy cruiser kind of tunnel visioned against, shooting off friendly surface units, so he wasn't turning. So with the correct lead, he was an easy target. And of course, he doesn't really have enough armor to protect against torpedo hits, even aerial torpedo hits at all. But right now, my fighter spotted the enemy fighter, and they're going in for sweeping run. And just look at the carnage. He never managed to get out of the way. Kind of got wiped out almost.
Target destroyed.
But unfortunately, I do believe my fighters also got wiped out,
Group 3 maintaining present course.
because the enemy does have shipborne AA, and they have to have too many of their fighters in the area. Unfortunately, the friendly CV is making the mistake of engaging enemy aircrafts when they have shipborne AA cover. That's really not a favorable situation at all.
Group 2 ready.
At this point, the enemy fighters was about to chase down my torpedo bombers, but I managed to relocate my torpedo bomber towards the top of my fleet, essentially. And so the enemy decided not to engage my aircrafts on top of my friendly AA. So he wasn't completely stupid, I guess. And right now, I did manage to essentially wipe out essentially two entire enemy fighter groups, the one strafing one, because his fighters was kind of unattended and stationary at that point, so it was a relatively easy hit.
Target destroyed. Engaging enemy. Group 3 returning.
Meanwhile, my torpedo bombers ended up going for the almost stationary enemy by Omi.
We've destroyed an enemy battleship.
Even with that ship going at full speed and turning at full rudder, it's still an easy hit. But the fact that he slowed down almost to a stop just made it even easier. Like shooting fishes in a barrel.
Awaiting instructions.
And from that point onward, I essentially ended up massacring much of the enemy's air power. Or perhaps I was a little lucky because they were easy targets at the wrong place at the wrong time.
Standing by for instructions. Over.
I do believe the enemy bulk has the air superiority loadout, but as you can see, after taking some attrition, he's essentially running out of fighters. He does have a full strength dive bomber squadron, but they just simply aren't doing much. When they go on attacking run, they are essentially vulnerable. With my fighter loitering over my fleet.
Group 3 taking fire. Group 3 awaiting instructions. Group 3 approaching target. Group 3 returning.
And so I decided to make the risky move of menu dropping against enemy Fusaka.
Enemy cruiser foundered.
But he was ultimately the enemy that was most threatening to
Our
my
victory
friendly
is in
fleet.
sight.
He was also kind of distracting and tunnel visioning against my friendly units in the surface engagement. So that kind of made him a somewhat easy target, despite the fact that he can turn fairly quickly and he's not slow at all. But then, once again, torpedoes are quite a bit stronger than dive bombers, and that cruiser is ultimately too fragile to take the hit. And somehow, this enemy fighter squadron from the Hosho decided to go on a kamikaze run straight towards our CVs. I managed to stop him in time. Didn't even need to do a strafing run. He just melted.
Group 3 ready
But then
for
my Shipborne AA is fairly decent against tier 4 aircrafts anyways, considering the Hosho in my training boat does get those 40mm autocannons, which are excellent.
Group 3 maintaining present.
The Bofors is a staple on most American ships, even up to tier 10. And you get those on the Montana,
Group 2 awaiting
the
instructions.
Gearing, so. And I believe the enemies might as well have a complete round of aircrafts, or almost, because even though I can observe their carriers as of right now, they just aren't launching anything.
2 awaiting instructions.
And so, right now the enemy's down to 2 carriers and also a cruiser. I decided to send in my torp bombers against their carriers, simply because the cruiser is a tougher target as well as a lower health target, so there's less of a chance to have a meaningful alpha strike on that thing.
Awaiting instructions. Group 3 standing by for instructions. Over. Group 3 standing by for instructions. Over. Group 3 engaging enemy. Group 3 taking fire. Group 3 returning.
Unfortunately, the enemy slowed and turned. It's already one torpedo. I think, compared to the Langley and Bulk, the Juriho and the Hosho really have quite spectacular mobility and maneuverability. So that's something they can pull off. But it's much harder to do in a Langley or Bulk either way. And right now I'm making a strafing run against the enemy Bulk's dive bombers. And there they go, 6 of them. They just got shredded. So that's the game. We essentially have it in the bag. Well, at this point I should probably apologize for the long wait that the Warship fans had to endure on my channel, because I literally haven't had a Warship video up since November, I believe. So I'm just trying to make it up to you. And also excuse my questionable narration simply because I happen to be pretty exhausted at this point. So you can realize that I'm dripping out and I'm being pretty slow, unfortunately. It is what it is. Meanwhile, you can see the results of every single game I have in this replay, or should I say in this video, except for the first bulk replay, simply because I forgot to save them. But it is what it is. Hopefully I will try to finish up my Warship videos soon enough, especially the Baron and Gneisenau video. And I should also have more materials coming up, simply because I recently purchased the Bismarck and so far it's been amazing. But I guess thanks for sticking around and thanks for watching. See you next time.